Yeah. Okay. So this is Daf Lamed Hey. We're gonna start at the top of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, second line. So we said yesterday we talked about this machloket between Rav Yosef and Rabbah with regard to how long it takes between sunset and nightfall, as we learned yesterday. So now we're coming to another machloket between them, b'chilufa b'chalata, that they have the exact reverse position when it comes to a basket or a container. So the reverse of what they said regarding Shabbat, because in the laws of Shabbat we saw that there was an argument about whether, according to Rabbah, you had 3/4 of a meal is the amount of time that one can walk from sunset to nightfall, and according to Rav Yosef it was 2/3 of a meal. So we saw that here, in the case of a basket, we have the reverse positions. The Amar Rabbah says, Chalata batire korei sharei l'taltula, ubatlata korei asur l'taltula. V'Rav Yosef Amar batlata korei nami sharei, bat arba'a korei asur. So they have here a machloket where here Rabbah is the one who takes the smaller measurement. He says that if you have a basket that can hold 2 kurs worth of volume, you're allowed to move it on Shabbat, but 3 you're not allowed to move it. We'll see why in a second. Rav Yosef says that if it can hold 3, you can also move it, but 4, that's too much. Now, what they're trying to measure here is when does it go from being considered a vessel, which is a movable item and which is a portable item, and therefore is something that can be moved on Shabbat, versus being considered something that's not a vessel, not a portable item, and therefore is muktzeh. It's not supposed to be handled or moved on Shabbat. That's what they're arguing about there. So Amar Abaye says that ba'emine demar bishat ma'aseh. I asked the master, where he's talking about Rabbah here, in the time of an actual practical case, va'afilu batre kurei lo sharali, and he didn't even allow me to move a basket that could hold 2 kur. So he was even more stringent than was reported in that halacha. Kiman, what was he following? Ki haytana, he was going like the following Braita, Ditnanas, or the following Mishnah, rather. Kaveret akash ve'kaveret akanim, if you have a basket made of straw or a basket made of reeds, or borsfina Alexandrit, or you have an Alexandrian cistern on a boat. What this was a large sort of container where they would put potable water, because they were in a boat that was traveling in seawater, which wasn't potable. So they would bring potable water in a large container in the boat, and this was called the Alexandrian cistern. It would contain the drinking water for the trip. So afal pi sheyesh lehem shulaim ben machzikot mem se'ah belach shen koraim biyavesh teorim. So even though they have a bottom, okay, since they're so large that they hold the volume of a mikveh inside, basically 40 sa'av liquid, which is 2 kur of dry measure, because 2 kur of dry measure, as we're going to see, is actually equivalent to 60 sa'ah. But the dry measure is larger, because with a dry measure you can pile past. In other words, if you want to fill a container with liquid, it can only go up to the edge of the container. If you fill it beyond that, it spills. With solid, you can actually fill it higher than the container. You have the ability to go a little bit higher than the walls of the container. So in any case, since it holds, in other words, even though it's a container and normally a container would be able to become tameh if it came into contact with tum'ah, this container is so large that it's not considered a vessel anymore. It's considered like a piece of a fixture, like something, a structure connected to the ground practically. And therefore, since it's so large that it's not a movable, it's not a portable item, it can't be moved when it's full. That's the standard. If it can't be moved by a person when it's full, then even when it's empty, it's not mekabel tum'ah. It is not subject to impurity. And therefore, we see from there that such a large item that contains 2 kur of volume is something that's so large that it would not be considered a vessel and cannot be moved on Shabbat, because it's muktzeh on Shabbat. Muktzeh because it's set to be left in place. It's not meant to be moved around. And Amar Abaye said, Shema Mina, we see from here, Hagudsha tilta have, that the amount that you can pile. Now we said that dry measure, you can fit more dry measure into a vessel than you can fit liquid measure. That it's about 1/3 more that you can fit, because we see that the dry measure is kurayim, which is 60 sa'ah. The liquid measure is 40 sa'ah, so that means that there's 1/3 more that you can actually fit in terms of dry measure into the same vessel. okay, relative to liquid measure. But the point here is that if something is so large that the liquid, it can contain a liquid measure of 40 sa'ah, which is the size of a mikveh, which means that it's not a vessel, but rather it's considered furniture, or it's considered something which is not to be moved, something which is not portable, therefore it is not mikabel tum'ah, and in the same way, it's meant to be left in place, and that means it wouldn't be able to be moved on Shabbat. But now we get back to our halachot of when Shabbat starts. Abaye chazil Rava dekad dave lema'arav. Abaye once saw Rava. He was looking to the west. And the reason why he was looking to the west was to see when Shabbat was going to start or when Shabbat was going to end. Amar le, he said to him, Vatanya, but it says in the Baraita, Kol zman shepnei mizrach ma'adimin. Didn't we read before in yesterday's daf that as long as how do we measure when Shabbat starts or when Shabbat ends? We measure it by when the eastern sky is dark. When the bottom of the eastern sky becomes dark, that means it's ben hashemashot, it's the twilight period where we're not sure. And once the entire eastern sky becomes dark, that's when Shabbat has definitely started or Shabbat has definitely ended. So why are you looking at the western sky? So Amar le, he said to him, Misavrat Pnei Mizrach Mamash. He said, it doesn't mean eastern sky literally. He says, Lo, Panim Hama'adimin et Mizrach. What it means is the side of the sky that lights up the east. So in other words, you don't look at the east, you look at the west actually, because they're talking about sunset. And where does the sun set? It sets in the west. So where do you look to determine when Shabbat is going to be over or when Shabbat is officially starting? You look not to the east, you look to the west. So why did they say Mizrach? Why did they say, why did they refer to the eastern sky? Because if you look at the sunlight, it shines, so to speak, on the opposite sky, the opposite place where it's going down. So they said the panim mi'idin et mizrach means the panim, the side that is lighting up the east, not the actual east. Okay, and they're going to give him an example for this in a second. Some say that Rava chazil Abaye dekad davel lemizrach, that it was actually Rava that saw Abaye looking at the east. Amar lemisavrat panei mizrach mamash, and he said to him, why are you looking to the east? It's not the east. Panim ma'adimin et mizrach. And he said, it really is the side of the sky that's lighting up the east. In other words, the west. V'simanach, and what is your v'simanech? What is the sign? Kavita, a window. In other words, just like when light shines through a window, where does the light fall? It falls on the opposite wall. Okay, if the light is shining through the window, the doors that are transparent, so where's the light going to fall? It's going to fall over here. So we could say that as long as this side is lit up, it's still daytime. But really, where do you look to see the source of the light? You really look over there. So he's saying in the same way, when it talked about the Mizrach, when it talked about the east, it meant that's where the light shines. But what's the source of the light? It's really the west, because that's where the sun is going down, and that's where you should look to determine the start of Shabbat. Rabbi Nechemia Omer, so they argued about what exactly is the amount of time between sunset and nightfall. We know that there's a twilight period, so how long is it? And he said the amount of time it takes to walk half a meal. Amar Rabbi Chanina said, Rabbi Nechemia. You want to know exactly the amount of time it takes to walk half a meal? You want to know what Rabbi Nechemia is talking about? I'll tell you how you can do it. Go to Har Carmel at the top. V'yered, and a person should go down, v'yidbol bayam, and then go and immerse in the sea, v'ya'la, and then go back up. And that, v'zehu shi'uro shel Rabbi Nechemia. That's the amount of time it takes from sunset to nightfall. Now, is that so precise? Perhaps not, but they're saying for the average person to go down from the top of the hill when the sun is coming down, and to go into the yam, and to come out of the ocean, and to go back up to the hill, that is the amount of time Rabbi Nechemia is talking about. Yeah, so it takes a while. So Rabbi Chia said, let's say you want to see the well of Miriam. Go to the top of Har Carmel and look. You'll see a type of sieve in the ocean. You'll see some kind of structure that looks like a sieve floating in the ocean. Zohi be'erashel Miriam. This is the well of Miriam, so you'll be able to see it. Amar Rav says, Ma'ayan mitaltel tahor. Any spring that is movable. Now, is there such a thing as a spring that's movable? Not really. So any spring that's movable is tahor, would not be subject to tumah. Vezehu be'erashel Miriam. But the only example of that we have is the well of Miriam, because you don't have any other spring that isn't attached to the ground. Obviously, a spring is water coming up from the ground. So Amar Rav Yehuda Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said, Shmuel said, Ben Hashemashot Rabbi Yehuda. During the Ben Hashemashot period of Rabbi Yehuda, and remember, Rabbi Yehuda says that Ben Hashemashot, the twilight period, goes from sunset until the sky is dark. Okay, so this time, this period where we're not sure if it's day or night, it's in the middle. So he says, Kohanim tovlin bo. The Kohanim can go to the mikveh during this time. Now that's problematic. Why? Because the halacha is that if a kohen is tamei, a kohen is impure, and he has to go to the mikveh, the rule is he has to go to the mikveh, and then he has to wait for nightfall before he can eat terumah. So if he goes at night to the mikveh, he has to wait till the following night to be able to eat terumah. If he goes to the mikveh during the day, that night he can eat terumah. In other words, whatever the case is, there has to be an immersion followed by sunset. But if the immersion happens after sunset, it's no good. So how can you say that the Kohanim are going to go to the mikveh after sunset? It shouldn't be good. Leman, Rabbi Yehuda. If you're saying that Rabbi Yehuda himself endorses Kohanim going to the mikveh after sunset, sifekahu, it should be a doubt. It's a doubt, because once the sun goes down, maybe it's nighttime already, and maybe this Kohen that's going to the mikveh is going to the mikveh at night, and not during the day. Ella ben hashemashot Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yossi. Kohanim tovelim bo. What it means is that according to Rabbi Yossi, he says that Kohanim can still go to the mikveh after sunset. During the time that Rabbi Yehuda considers twilight time, Rabbi Yossi says that's still daytime. That's still daytime for him. Pshita, that should be obvious. Mahu detema. What might you have thought? Ben hashmashot Rabbi Yossi mishach shayech b'di Rabbi Yehuda. Kamashmalan dishalim ben hashemashot Rabbi Yehuda v'adar matchil ben hashemashot Rabbi Yossi. Because you might have thought that period of time of Rabbi Yehuda, there's some overlap between the time of Rabbi Yehuda and the time of Rabbi Yossi, and therefore there's some point where they agree, where they would both agree that one should not go, that one should treat it as nighttime. And the answer is no, that Rabbi Yehuda has a period of time from sunset until nightfall that he considers doubtful. And Rabbi Yossi, right after that period, says there's another moment that's also in doubt. But he says that the part that Rabbi Yehuda considers doubtful is definitely daytime. Okay, he's much more lenient. And that was the chidush here. So, Amar Rabba Bar Chana says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Halachak Rabbi Yehuda le'inyan Shabbat, Halachak Rabbi Yossi le'inyan terumah. That the law follows Rabbi Yehuda with regard to Shabbat. In other words, once the sun goes down, we consider it Shabbat. It's a doubt still. We're not 100% sure, but we assume it's Shabbat. At the end of Shabbat, we wait till Rabbi Yossi's period, until Rabbi Yehuda's period of time for Ben Hashemashot is over before we end Shabbat. So we follow Rabbi Yehuda, but with regard to Terumah, we follow Rabbi Yossi. So the question is, of course, Bishlam halachak Rabbi Yehuda linyan Shabbat l'chumrah. Now, with regard to Rabbi Yehuda, it makes sense. That's l'chumrah. That's a stringency. You're saying that as soon as the sun goes down, you're going to consider it Shabbat. You're not going to wait another half hour like Rabbi Yossi would say that you could. You're going to right away consider it Shabbat. But aval linyan Terumah maihi. What are you talking about? Terumah, we follow Rabbi Yossi. If you're going to tell me that somebody can go to the mikveh, the kohen can go to the mikveh even after sunset and rely on Rabbi Yehuda, it's still a doubt. Why would you be lenient and allow the kohen to go to the mikveh after sunset? What he means to say is that a stringency here, that with regard to the beginning of Shabbat, we say that we follow Rabbi Yehuda's position, that as soon as the sun goes down, we say, okay, we're going to treat it like Shabbat, even though it's a doubt, we're going to treat it like Shabbat. But with regard to eating terumah, where we have to be sure that night has fallen for the Kohanim before they eat terumah, they have to immerse during the day and then wait for nightfall. There, they have to wait that extra bit of time for Rabbi Yossi to be stringent. So they have to wait not only through the time that Rabbi Yehuda says it's doubtful, but even that extra time to be sure that it's nightfall before they eat the terumah. Am Rabbi Yehuda, Am Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said, Kochav echad yom. When you can only see one star in the sky, it's still daytime. Shnayim ben hashemashot. If you see two stars, it's a doubt. We're not sure where we stand. Shlosha laila. Once you see three stars, we know 3 stars. Nighttime. Tanya nami achi. We similarly learned in a baraita. Kochav echad yom. Shenayim ben hashemashot. Shlosha laila. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Lo kochavim gedolim anirim bayom. V'lo kochavim ktanim she'en yir'in ela balayla. This doesn't mean gigantic stars that you could see even during the daytime. And it doesn't mean tiny stars that you can only see in the middle of the night and you can barely see them even at night. Ela benonim. What it means is middle-sized stars. In other words, you need to be able to see 3 medium-sized stars in order to determine that it's night. And as we mentioned yesterday, it's not that seeing stars makes it night. People think that the stars are what makes it night. That's not what it is. It's that enough light has to be gone that you can see the stars. It's not the seeing of the stars that makes it night. It's the dissipating of the light that makes it night. It has to be dark enough to see 3 medium stars. That means it's fully dark out, and therefore it's nighttime. Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Zveda. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Zveda says, "Ha'osem melacha b'shnei ben hashemashot chayav chatat mima nafshach." If a person does melacha in both ben hashemashot, in other words, let's say sunset is 5 o'clock. which now is very reasonable time. Actually, maybe 4:45. I don't know, 5 o'clock. The person passed sunset, and they wrote a letter to their friend. Shabbat, sunset had started. It wasn't Tzeta Kochavim yet. It was not yet stars coming out yet. It was that in-between period. He writes a letter to his friend through the whole Ben Hashemashot. And then, Saturday night, he goes again, and after sunset, he writes a letter to his friend for that last 20 minutes, 30 minutes of Shabbat. So he says, Chayam chatat mima nafshach. Either way, he's obligated in a chatat. In other words, he violated Shabbat for sure. Because if that period is really daytime, in other words, we're in doubt. The period from sunset until the stars come out, we don't know what to make of it. So if we assume it's daytime, then the thing he did on Saturday night was really daytime. Right? Because that period from 5 to 5:30 was daytime. But Friday he was okay actually, because 5 to 5:30 was daytime, it was Friday.
But Chav Chatat as opposed to Chav Karet, because
both same, it's the same. Yeah. So, but if we assume, in other words, that from 5 to 5:30 is really nighttime, once the sun goes down, so that means that Friday he violated Shabbat, because from 5 to 5:30 he violated Shabbat, but on Saturday night he was actually okay. The point is that period from 5 to 5:30, you can't do this. You can't say, well, on Friday it's a doubt, so I'm going to say it was really daytime, and then on Saturday night it was also a doubt, so I'm going to say it's nighttime, and that way he's clear on both. We don't do that. We say it's definitely one or the other. It's not a doubt where we say, oh, it's a doubt in both cases, so we can go either way. In each case we're going to look at differently. Okay? It's a doubt that one of them is definitely day, and it's either definitely day or definitely night. We just don't know which one. So since we don't know which one, if you violated Shabbat in both of them, for sure you did it. Okay, that's what he says. So now, well, you would be in doubt all the time. In other words, instead of bringing a chatat, what you would do is you would bring what's called a korban asham talui. So asham talui means I'm not sure if I violated Shabbat or not. So then you'd have to bring that every Shabbat. If you picked one or the other, you have to pick it every Shabbat. Here he's saying, since you did both, you definitely violated Shabbat. Okay, in a case where you only did one of them, you could bring an asham talui, which means I'm not sure because I don't know if that's considered nighttime or not.
With Mincha Mariv of the middle of the week,
right,
you can actually go back and at least according to
right. Well,
and you can go back.
There's a certain limit. There's a limit to how far after sunset. Right. Well, there's also a question as to how long after sunset you can really do mincha. There's a dispute about that. So it's not like the whole Ben Hashemashot you can do mincha. It's within a certain window there. So anyway, Amar le Rava l'Shama'e, Rava said to his servant, Atun delo kim lechu b'shiur ad Rabbanan ad shimsha aresh dikle at lushargab. He says, you guys who are not good at telling what. Yeah, you can't tell what time Shabbat really starts. You're not so good with these measurements, okay? So once you see that the sun is in the palm trees, okay, it's at the level of the palm trees, ad lushraga, you should light the candle. In other words, that's when you should start Shabbat, to be careful. And biyom me'onan mai, so what should you do on a cloudy day where you can't see the sun? B'matach hazei tarnagola b'davra orve inami adane. He says there are 3 signs. If you live in the city, then once the roosters start resting for the night, they go and they sit on their place that's going to be their resting place, on the boards that they would sit on. So then you know, because animals, they have a natural sense for nighttime. So you see the roosters go, even though it's not sunset yet, you should start Shabbat because you're not going to be able to see the sun go down because it's too cloudy. So when you see the roosters know it's nighttime. You should go with that roosters. If you're in the desert, go with the orvim. What's the word for orvim? What do you call them in English? Not the vultures. Vultures? No. Ravens. Right. So yeah, go with the ravens. And or the adane is some kind of plant. I'm not sure what plant this is, but it's a plant that faces the sun. So in the morning, the leaves bend towards the east, and then by the evening they bend towards the west. So you can use that as your measure of when Shabbat is about to start, and therefore you have natural signs with or without the clear ability to see the sun. Now, Tanur Baran, this is the last piece for today, that Shesh Tekiyot, the rabbi said, there were 6 times they would blow the shofar on Erev Shabbat. Right, Shesh Tekiyot took in Erev Shabbat. Rishona lavtil ta'amim melacha. The first one was in order to tell people to stop doing melacha. Shebasadot, the people who were in the fields. Shini'a lavtil ir v'hanuyot. The second one was to tell the people in the cities to close up their shops. Shlishit ladlikat haner. The third one was to light the candle. Divrei Rabbi Natan. This is what Rabbi Natan says. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Omer Shlishit lachalot tefillin v'shohek kedetz liyad dag katan. O kedei ladbik batanor v'tokea u'meiria v'tokea v'shovet. So everybody agrees that there's some. The first one is to tell the people to stop working in the fields. The second one is to tell the people to stop working in the cities and close up the shop. The third one is either to tell you to light the candle, or it's to tell you to take off your tefillin. Because remember, people wore tefillin all day back then. So you would take off your tefillin before Shabbat, and then they would do 3 more blasts, tikiyah, teruah, tikiyah, and it was Shabbat. So they would wait just the amount of time it took to roast a small fish, or to put bread, lahadbik batanur, to put some bread to cook in the oven. In other words, there were a few extra minutes there between the time that they told you to light the candle, or the time that they told you to take off your tefillin, and the time that you actually had to start Shabbat, and then you would begin Shabbat. So that was the signal that they had. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, "Ma naseh lehem lebavlim shetokin u'merin v'shovetin." What about the bavlim? That they don't do this. Instead of doing tikiyah, teruah, tikiyah right before Shabbat, 3 blasts, they just do tikiyah, teruah, v'shovetin mitoch merin. Okay, so they end up stopping. In other words, they do the first 3 blasts of the shofar, like we said you should do, and then instead of doing 1, 2, 3 and starting Shabbat, they just do 1, 2, tikiyah, teruah, and they start Shabbat. They don't do tikiyah, teruah, tikiyah. So what happens? Tokino merin avu luchamisha. But they have only 5 then. That's only 5 blasts, because they did 1, 2, 3, and then at the end, right before Shabbat starts, instead of doing tikiyah, teruah, tikiyah, they did just tikiyah, teruah. That's only 5. So ela shetokin v'chozrin v'tokin u'merin v'shovtin mitoch merin. The problem wasn't that they just did tikiyah, teruah. If they just did tikiyah, teruah, then they wouldn't be doing the takanat chachamim at all, because that would only be 5 blasts instead of 6 blasts. So how could it be that they would only have 5 blasts? Rather, what they did was as follows. They would do a blast to tell people to stop working in the fields. They would do a blast to tell the people to close up the shop. They would do a blast to tell the people to light their Shabbat candles. And then they would do tikiyah, teruah. Instead of tikiyah, teruah, tikiyah, they would do 2 tikiyot and a teruah. And they would stop with teruah. That wasn't exactly what the rabbis had in mind. They wanted them to do tikiyah, teruah, tikiyah. Instead, they did tikiyah, teruah. So what's the deal with that? Minhag avotehen b'idehen. That was the custom that they had. Minhag avotehen, and because it was their minhag, we leave them that way. Matnele Rav Yehuda Rav Yitzchak Bereh. Rav Yehuda was teaching his son Rav Yitzchak shniya ladlik et haner, that the second blowing of the shofar was to light the Shabbat candle. We said to him, Kiman, who is this like? Look, Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Yehuda. To both Rabbi Natan and Yehuda, this would be wrong. Look, Rabbi Yehuda. See, this is according to anyone. According to everyone, the second blast is close up the stores. Rather, what he meant to say was the third blast is to light the candle, which is in accordance with the view of Rabbi Natan. Tana Dve Rabbi Yishmael, the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael taught as follows: so they would blow 6 blasts on Erev Shabbat. When they blew the first blast, the people who were in the fields would stop hoeing, and they would stop plowing, stop doing any work in the fields. And then the people who were in the fields that were close to the city would wait those who were in the field further out. They would all come in together. They would all come into together. And the shops were still open. They had their wares hanging on the tresin, these special kinds of places where they would hang the stuff they're selling. Then they would second blast. Stores would close. They would put away their merchandise. Okay, so everybody's already from the fields, but they wait for each other. So all the farmers come together. They come into the city. They blow shofar. Yeah.
The shofar blowing doesn't really tell us anything about the timing, because it doesn't really say how long they would wait between the.
Well, it's not right. That's true. That is true. It doesn't tell you. So I guess they've had a sense of how long each one of these processes took, and so they would blow the shofar. They knew how long it took for everybody to come in from the fields. Then they would blow fire again. They knew how long it would take. Yeah, they have the sirens. Right? So the assumption here is that they knew how long it took for each one of these things to take place. It doesn't give a time. But we're working backwards from when Shabbat starts. A few minutes before that is going to be the last tikiyah, teruah, tikiyah, or a minute before that, whatever. And shortly before that is the taking off the tefillin or the lighting of candles. And so you have to work backwards and figure that all these things happened within, a half an hour or 40 minutes or something like that. So now the first 2 blasts have been blown. So everybody who was working in the fields has come in. Everybody who was in their shops has come home. But still, you still have all the food on the oven still cooking, because people are not done yet. They didn't start Shabbat yet. When they would blow the third tikiyah, and whatever you needed to take off the oven, you took off. Whatever you needed to insulate, to keep warm, you kept warm. Whoever needed to light candles. And the vishohet liad dag katan, you would wait the amount that it took to roast a small fish. In other words, you would wait a few minutes or a few moments, or the amount of time it would take to bread some bread in the oven to quickly. So a few minutes it would take for a bread to the oven. And they would blow. Everybody would then be Shabbat. So what you see there is the I would say how much time it takes for a small loaf to cook in the oven. That's the period of time that is from the blowing of the shofar till from the second until the last blowing of the shofar. So then we say, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chaned, Shamati Shim Bad Lahadlik Achar Shesh Tikiyot. I heard even if you want to, we said that you're supposed to light candles before that final blast of the shofar. Because you had 1, 2, 3. Third one, you still had a little bit of time, and then there's 1, 2, 3 again, and you're supposed to stop. He said, I heard that even after the last 1, 2, 3, there's still that you could light your Shabbat candle. How so? Because because they gave enough time for the guys in charge of the shofar blowing to go home with the shofar. So that's a few minutes, So then he says, how do you know where he lives? That's too subjective. Maybe one guy lives right next door. It's a 10-minute walk, another guy lives a 20-minute walk. So I'm going to tell people that time that those last shofar blasts are blown, they have a little bit of time to light the candle. If you do that, who's going to know how much? Who's going to know what time it is? It's not fixed. So Elom Sanor Yeshlo Lachazan Knesset V'Rosh Gago Shish Chatzotzrot. He says that the Knesset, the person who was in charge of blowing this, would have a special roof where he shut the shofar right before Shabbat started in order to keep for safekeeping. Shabbat began right after he was done blowing shofar, and obviously he's not allowed to hand shofar on Shabbat. So he would have to. He didn't go home after that king. Vatan, we said shofar mitel v'chatzotzrot intel talin. Doesn't it say that you can carry shofar on Shabbat? That handling a shofar is okay? It's not say. Who is this to be? Says on the side that this Rav Yosef. So Amar Rav Yosef. So he says, but the answer he gave was, well, because your personal shofar, you can use it to pour water to a child. You can use it as a container for water. So therefore, not muktzeh because it has action. So he says, but tzibor nam hazila gamel latani. Well, the first shofar, the shofar that belongs to the sinner, can also use it. A poor person who will drink water out of it, you can fill it as a cup. We also say that there's another bright as you can touch a shofar and you can touch chatzotzrot. So one says you can touch a shofar, but you can't touch trumpets. The other one, both are okay. So what's the answer? So it says, who's the author of that? La Kashya, ha Rabbi Yehuda, ha Rabbi Shimon, ha Nechemiah. One is Rabbi Yehuda, one is Rabbi Nechemiah. What does this mean to say? It means that there's a big machloket about mukteh that we're going to learn later in the Masekhet. There's a big machloket about what parameters of this love mukteh that you're not allowed to handle certain things on Shabbat. Rabbi Nechemiah is most strict. He says you can only handle something for its designated purpose on Shabbat, which means to say that even if you use, let's say, a hammer to break nuts open or a coconut open, because a hammer's purpose is for nails and build. So since that's not the usual use of a hammer, you can use it at all, but even for a use you can't handle it. Rabbi Yehuda says he is the medium. So Rabbi Yehuda would say you can't touch a trumpet and you can't touch a shofar, you can't touch any of these things on Shabbat. Because even if you could find a use for a shofar on Shabbat, only allowed to use something for its designated use. Is the designated a shofar to give to somebody? No. So you can't use it for that at all. Rabbi Yehuda says he makes a sort of a medium position. He says if you find a use that's legit on Shabbat, then you can handle it. So he says trumpet, no use. Shofar. There you go, yeah. So Rabbi would say, no, because you can use something letzorach mikomo. So you wouldn't have to. Apparently not. If it is an that lends to that use, then you would be able to use it. So according to Yehuda, you would be able to take shofar and you would be able to use it for some Shabbat, so it's okay. The chatzotzrot, no, there's no way you use it on Shabbat. That's legit. Rabbi Shimon is the most lenient. He is the one who says, unless you specifically said, I don't want to have anything with this on Shabbat, you're allowed to handle it. So he would say, chatzotzrot, even a trumpet, you could move on Shabbat if you had reason to move it, and you wouldn't have to say that it's mukteh because he has the most lenient view of all when it comes to the laws of mukteh of anybody. So you have these extremes. So therefore, according to Rabbi Nechemiah, you can't touch either a shofar or a chatzotzrot. According to Rabbi Yehuda, shofar, yes, because it has a function, chatzotzrot, no. And according to Rabbi Shimon, both a shofar and chatzotzrot, you would be able to move around on Shabbat. And of course, for practical purposes, we generally follow Rabbi Yehuda with respect to this and say that anything that has a function on Shabbat, you can move. Anything that doesn't have a function on Shabbat, you would not be able to move. And that's what we're going to leave off for today. Have a great day.